Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Billionaire finds black boy on her son's grave, and what happens next is unbelievable. The wind blew gently through the tall cypress trees of Greenhill Memorial Park, caressing the branches like invisible fingers playing a melancholy lullaby. Fallen leaves, russet and gold, scattered across the white gravel paths, forming trails of scattered memories. This immaculate private cemetery was nestled in the heart of the affluent suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina, surrounded by low walls of ancient stone, statues of silent angels, and marble benches that no one truly occupied anymore. That morning, like every Saturday for the past 1,000 days or so, Mary Beth Caldwell slowly stepped out of her sleek, discreet black sedan. Her personal chauffeur, James, a man as discreet as he was loyal, opened the door without a word. She placed her foot on the frozen ground, leaning lightly on her cane, then took a deep breath. She wore a long, cream-colored cashmere coat, its pleats falling elegantly to her ankles. Her soft, hazelnut-colored leather gloves enveloped hands marked by time but still full of grace. On her arm rested a bouquet of white lilies, fresh from the morning, carefully tied by her regular florist. They were the favorite flowers of Andrew, her son, her world. For 3 years, ever since that phone call one winter evening that shattered her reality into 1,000 pieces, Mary Beth hadn't been entirely alive. She'd left her role as president of the Caldwell Real Estate Group, refused investor cocktail parties, and shut the door on her socialite friends and gala dinners. Her world had shrunk to these weekly visits, which had become a silent rite of survival. Every Saturday at the same time, she came here, walked alone among the cold stones, to the one engraved with the name of Andrew Philip Caldwell, architect, philanthropist, a light in this world, according to the epitaph. She sat on the granite bench, placed flowers at the foot of the grave, closed her eyes, and began an inner dialogue. She told him about her week, asked questions to which she imagined the answers, relived the laughter of childhood, the silences of adolescence, and those last years stolen by a cruel fate. But that morning, something interrupted the ritual. As she turned the corner of the path lined with neatly trimmed bushes, she stopped dead in her tracks. Someone was there. A black boy, frail and silent, sat directly on the fresh grass, just in front of Andrew's grave. He wore a jacket that was too big for him, threadbare at the elbows, and a gray cap that came almost down over his eyes. He didn't notice the car, nor the click of Mary Beth's heels on the gravel, nor even the shadow that was now falling over him. His attention was entirely focused on the tombstone. He had very carefully placed a small red plastic car on it, a worn but still intact toy, like an offering. He was murmuring something, very quietly. A whisper of indistinct words. A prayer perhaps. Or a memory. Mary Beth felt her heart slow. She didn't move, didn't dare speak or interrupt this strangely sacred scene. There was a solemnity there she recognized. An ancient sorrow. She clutched the bouquet of lilies to her, too tightly without realizing it, until she crumpled one of the stems. For a few seconds, she didn't see a stranger at her son's grave. She saw an invisible connection, a bridge between two worlds. And she knew, even before she opened her mouth, that this boy wasn't there by chance. Mary Beth approached slowly, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Her furrowed brows betrayed unexpected confusion, almost a dull anguish. She wasn't used to being surprised, especially not in this place, this personal sanctuary where everything had been frozen for 3 years. She stopped a meter from the boy and said, in a soft, veiled but authoritative voice, "Excuse me, this is my son's grave." The boy slowly looked up at her. His face was young, smooth, but marked by a strange gravity for a child his age. He must have been just 10 years old. His gaze was calm, deep, almost too adult. He showed no fear, no embarrassment, nor the instinct to run away as so many children would have done in his place. He answered with disarming simplicity, as if reciting an unassailable truth. "I know. It's Andrew Caldwell. He was my friend." The words echoed through Mary Beth like a clap of thunder in a closed sky. His friend? She repeated, almost without believing it. Tanami? The boy nodded with quiet conviction. He came to the Camden Youth Center, he explained, pointing vaguely south, beyond the cemetery gates, where I go after school. He helped us with our homework. He taught me long division, and also how to make paper airplanes that fly straight, not the ones that spin like crazy. He gave me this car, the last time he was here. He pointed to the little red car placed carefully on the tombstone, like a relic. Mary Beth felt something crack inside her. An inner rift. Andrew had never, ever told her about this center. She knew his schedule, his plans, his brilliant career. Or at least, she did know them. He had never mentioned community involvement, much less this discreet and powerful bond with a child. And yet, in that precise moment, she was discovering a whole part of her son's life, an invisible but essential part, one that spoke of his soul more than of his titles. She whispered, almost apologetically. "What's your name?" "The regret." "Jalen Turner." She looked at him more closely. His coat was too thin for the biting November cold. His clothes were clean, neatly pressed, but worn at the seams and at the knees. A child of little means, but raised with dignity. Mary Beth felt her legs weaken under the weight of emotion. She sat down slowly on the stone bench beside him, saying nothing for a few seconds. She rubbed her hands nervously, staring at the gray stone where her son's name was engraved. Andrew Philip Caldwell. Even the letters looked different today. "Do you come here often?" she finally asked. Jalen nodded, not looking away from the grave. "Every Saturday. Like today. I talked to him. He told me one day. Even if I leave, you just have to talk to me here, and I'll be there." The words fell on Mary Beth like warm rain on a winter heart. They washed right through her. They were so simple. So pure. And so typical of Andrew. That kind of silent, almost mystical promise he sometimes made without anyone taking them seriously. She said nothing. Her throat tightened. A single tear slid down her wrinkled cheek. She looked at the little red car, suddenly precious, almost sacred. She no longer knew whether she had the right to be angry at not having known, or simply grateful. She slowly turned to Jalen. "Did you eat this morning?" The boy shook his head gently. She stood up, slowly but determinedly, as if a choice had just been made within her. "Come on. I'll invite you to lunch." He looked at her, hesitant. His childish instincts made him cautious, but not fearful. He wanted to say yes. But first he thought of his mother. "I have to ask my mom," he said seriously. Mary Beth smiled slightly, for the first time in a long time. "Sure. Can you give me his number? I'll call him right away." She pulled her phone from her black leather purse, ready to dial. And for the first time since her son's death, the screaming emptiness inside her was pierced by a small ray of light. Jalen's mother, Keisha Turner, was a strong, straightforward woman shaped by the realities of everyday life. A night nurse at Charleston Regional Hospital, she worked 12-hour shifts, often 6 days a week, to provide for her son. Her life was a succession of early mornings, bus rides, impromptu meals, and bills to manage, and yet, she held her head high. What she had earned through sweat, sacrifice, and a fierce faith in her son. When Mary Beth first called, Keisha was wary. She listened to the polite, steady voice of the white woman, well articulated, with an almost aristocratic tone. A voice too calm. Too soft. Too rich. She had seen these kinds of people before in the private corridors of the hospital, outwardly kind, but often full of condescending pity or veiled intentions. A billionaire interested in her son? She instantly stiffened. In this world, nothing was free. Too many promises, too many empty words, too many doors that slammed shut as soon as you revealed your address or the color of your skin. Yet something in Mary Beth's voice, perhaps the tiredness she barely concealed, aroused a cautious curiosity. She called back within the hour. Her reply was brief and direct. "If you want to speak to me, Miss Caldwell, it will be in a neutral location. Not at your home, and not at my home either." Mary Beth accepted without question. She suggested a modest cafe in the Northbridge neighborhood, far from her usual circles, where the tables were striped wood and the waitresses called everyone honey. That same day, they found themselves face to face, in late afternoon light filtering through a dirty window. Keisha arrived in her uniform, her features drawn, her eyelids heavy with fatigue. Mary Beth wore a pearl blouse and a beige cardigan, her jewelry discreet but refined. Two worlds. Two women. Two pains. Mary Beth didn't talk about money, charity, or plans for the future. She spoke about Andrew. She recounted, her voice breaking at times, how she had thought she knew her son, and how meeting Jalen had shattered that certainty. She spoke of the Saturdays, the tombstone, the silence, the red car placed there like an offering. She said she hadn't come to take anything, or offer alms. She simply wanted to understand. And perhaps, in this boy, find a fragment of what Andrew had been. Keisha was silent for a long moment. She held her coffee cup in her calloused hands, as if to warm herself. Her gaze was frank, almost piercing. "Jalen once told me he wanted to be a man like Andrew." She paused, her eyes unfocused. "I never knew what that meant. He told me that Andrew really listened. That he never spoke like adults who want to be right. That he was simply there. No matter how tired, no matter how busy, he always came back." She looked Mary Beth in the face. "Now I understand. I understand why he loved her so much. Why he returns to her grave every week. You raised a good man, Mrs. Caldwell." Mary Beth, usually straight as a board, felt her back arch under the weight of this recognition. She nodded, her eyes misty. "And you raised an extraordinary son, Keisha." He made me want to breathe again. A silence fell. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was binding. Thus began an unlikely relationship between two women seemingly opposed in every way, wealth and modesty, skin color, neighborhood, history, but brought together by grief, the love of a son, and dignity. It wasn't an immediate friendship. Not one where confidences are shared upon first meeting. But a silent pact, born from the mutual recognition of their wounds and the shared need to watch over Jalen. Mary Beth began inviting Jalen over for weekends, first once, then twice, then almost regularly. It didn't feel like a premeditated decision, but rather a heartfelt impulse, a deep, even vital need to hear life echoing through her silent home once again. The first time he walked through the doors of the Caldwell mansion, Jalen's eyes widened. He'd never seen a place like it. The ceilings were high, the spiral staircases carved from dark wood. Artwork lined the walls, and the sweet smell of beeswax hung in the air. Yet, despite the luxury, nothing felt cold. Mary Beth herself had rediscovered her home through the child's wondering eyes. She found herself dusting the frames, opening the shutters, asking James, her chauffeur, to install a swing in the old oak tree in the garden. One Saturday afternoon, she took him to the large library adjoining the living room. Thousands of books lay there, meticulously filed, almost forgotten since Andrew's death. She placed her hand on Jalen's shoulder. "This is where he spent hours. He read everything. But especially books on architecture and mathematics. He loved understanding how things stood up, and why they fell apart." Jalen nodded, already drawn to a shelf of large, illustrated books. He began leafing through an urban planning atlas as if exploring an ancient treasure. He asked dozens of questions, jotted down ideas, and was already sketching shapes in a notebook she had given him. Little by little, Mary Beth introduced him to chess, a game she hadn't touched since her husband's death, then to geometry books, and especially to the architectural models Andrew had left behind. Some were unfinished, others so precise they seemed to breathe. Jalen studied them like an apprentice studying a master's sketches. He absorbed everything. Curious, lively, attentive. He didn't talk much about himself, but every silence was inhabited, every look full of gratitude. Mary Beth, for her part, was rediscovering herself in a role she had never truly held, that of an active witness to childhood, not as an educator or a mentor, but simply as a stable, patient, and loving presence. At the same time, Mary Beth discreetly renovated the Camden Youth Center. The rooms were repainted, the computers replaced, and a new study room equipped. She signed no ostentatious checks or cut any ribbons. Everything was done under the name of the Caldwell Foundation, without press photos. This wasn't charity, it was remembrance. She wanted to continue her son's invisible work, the work she had discovered only too late. Then she went further. She created a scholarship for excellence, soberly titled Andrew Caldwell Scholarship, dedicated to brilliant young people from modest backgrounds, bearers of dreams and discipline. Jalen was the very first beneficiary. But the money, the books, the projects, all of this was just background. What overwhelmed the people who saw them together was tenderness. A gentle, unpretentious affection. Something rare, something that even the wealthiest cannot buy. Mary Beth read to Jalen in the evenings, on the large leather sofa in the living room, her feet propped up on an old wool blanket. She was regaining a taste for voices, for words, for the warmth of shared stories. He adored tales of inventors and builders, but also tales of justice and courage. For his part, Jalen showed her his drawings, sometimes clumsy, but full of intuition. She collected them in a large cardboard folder, noting the date, progress, and comments. And they often laughed. At everything and nothing. At the cookies she burned while trying to bake. At the old cat's deep meows. At his slightly old-fashioned expressions, which he repeated to tease her. Mary Beth had never known this. Not even with Andrew. She had loved him, of course. But she had also shaped him, pushed him, guided him toward excellence with the rigor of a businesswoman. She had offered him the best schools, the best opportunities, but never the most precious luxury, that of shared time without purpose. Of listening without expectation. Of simple presence. With Jalen, she wasn't looking to train a successor. She was just there. And he was there. And in that silent exchange, together they were repairing something the world had broken in them. 2 years later, Jalen Turner, now a teenager, enrolled at the prestigious Lincoln Preparatory Academy, one of the most highly regarded institutions in all of South Carolina. Situated on a hill surrounded by century-old magnolia trees, the school was home to the nation's future leaders, doctors, engineers, writers, judges, and now, him. From the very first months, he shone. He wasn't just gifted, he was passionate. He devoured math textbooks like others read novels, spent his breaks programming electronic circuits, and participated in poetry, logic, and public speaking competitions. In robotics, he was the youngest member of the team, but already their creative driving force. Mary Beth, true to form, attended all of his competitions. She always sat in the front row, knitting slowly, her gaze fixed on him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and pride she never thought she could feel again. Her neighbors in the stands recognized her now, some giving her knowing smiles. It's the lady of the boy in the blue blazer. But no one knew the whole story. Then came the National Applied Science Competition in Atlanta. Hundreds of young people from all 50 states competed. Fierce competition, demanding judges. Jalen presented a project for an educational robot capable of helping struggling children learn the basics of calculus through play. The prototype, modest in appearance, impressed with its efficiency, its sensitivity to voice, and the intelligence of its algorithm. When Jalen Turner's name was called for the gold medal, a stunned silence fell over the room, followed by a standing ovation. In a packed auditorium, as the lights shone on him, Jalen walked onto the stage, slightly trembling, holding his small piece of paper in his hands. He took a deep breath. And spoke. I am here thanks to 3 people. 3 pillars in my life. My mother, first. Keisha Turner. She works nights at the hospital. She sleeps little, often eats standing up, but she has always been there. Even when I felt like giving up, she would look at me and say, "You can do this, because you want to." Then there's Andrew Caldwell. He's not here today, but he was the first person to believe in me, even before I understood the value of my mind. He showed me that kindness could change a life, even silently, even just by spending an hour with a child. And finally, Miss Mary Beth. She lost her son. And instead of closing her heart, she decided to open hers to another child. She taught me that even after great loss, you can still love. And that sometimes love is simply staying there, unconditionally. In the audience, Mary Beth Caldwell didn't move. She didn't raise her hand to applaud, nor did she hide her face. She stood tall, dignified, her eyes misty, weeping silently. A tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the wool of her unfinished work. At that time, she was not Mrs. Caldwell, nor the wealthy widow of the real estate tycoon. She was a grandmother. Family. A few months later, she announced the creation of the Andrew and Jalen Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing access to education, technology, and mentoring for children in disadvantaged neighborhoods. In a sober and unassuming television interview, Mary Beth said, "I thought I'd lost everything when Andrew died. My future. My legacy. My heart. But that day, standing at his graveside, I realized he'd left me a gift far more precious than a name or a fortune. He'd left me a connection. A living extension of his heart. And today, that connection is Jalen." Years passed. Jalen Turner grew up, earned a full scholarship to MIT, and then a PhD in social engineering and artificial intelligence. He could have worked for Silicon Valley or NASA. He refused. He chose to return to Charleston, where it all began. With the foundation's support, he launched a mobile digital education program for children without access to quality schools. Buses were converted into rolling classrooms, tablets were distributed free of charge, and volunteer mentors were trained. All led by a young man who had never forgotten who had first seen him. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the program's first permanent facility, Jalen spoke to the crowd with emotion. "My story began on a grave. But thanks to it, I learned to live. I learned that the most powerful bonds are not those of blood, but those of the soul. Those we forge in silence, in listening, in trust. And I am here today, not to pay homage to my past, but to build futures." And in the first classroom of this center, on the entrance wall, a wooden board bore two names engraved in fine gold. In memory of Andrew Caldwell, in honor of Jalen Turner. Because sometimes, one life extinguished rekindles another.